I want to acknowledge the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also the particular groups within the Kulin Nation that I'm associated with today. Wurundjeri, whose land we're standing on, Djadjurrung, who I'll mention throughout my talk, Wadawurrung also, and also mention Tamarong, each of whom are on journeys which I'll relate today. I have been listed as you mentioned, as a speaker of or from on behalf of Landcare Australia, and whilst I've been in the role for only a couple of years and learned a lot from it, the views I'm expressing today are my own. They are informed by that 2-year period I've been involved with Landcare as its chair, but they're also informed by a range of other things I've been doing across Australia in the last few years. Managing 5 million hectares of Indigenous protected area in the APY lands of Central Australia, working with Djadjurrung on their joint management planning, which I'll mention in a moment. Working with a carbon company in Northern Australia, Natural Carbon, that's a for-profit business. I've been working with a range of CMAs and natural resource management groups, including in the Desert Channels country of Queensland and closer to home for me in Victoria. And all these things inform the commentary I'm going to make today. I found the early discussion about language really interesting, and that little tussle there was about landscape and country. I often avoid using country other than when speaking of traditional owners, because I wonder if I'm appropriating that word, and landscape feels very comfortable for me, and so I use that word through my talk. Driving here with my friend Pete, he said, "What's this connectivity thing?" And I thought, "What, really?" But connectivity means different things to different people. And I was thinking of it about landscape, and he was thinking of it about people connecting. We're doing both. I love the idea of inspiration capital, which was mentioned earlier today. I love that concept of being inspired, as we have been by the students speaking of their talks earlier, their studies rather earlier. So yeah, I entitled my address A View from the Back Step, because my preparation for it began on the back step of a property near Maryborough in central Victoria that I was staying on over the Cup Day long weekend. And the back step is a place where people often do reflect and think to the future. This farm had been in the same family for over a century and was taken up just prior to the gold rush in the 1850s. So really nice to have the earlier address about the gold rush. And as was stated, much had already changed in that landscape by the 1850s. The local Djadjurrung clans who'd occupied the region for countless generations had lived, worked and hunted in that country. They then were hunted themselves as part of the frontier wars. And by 1870, most of the Djadjurrung were relocated to Corranderk near Healesville. However, as I sat on the back step, evidence of their occupation is visible only a short walk from where I sat. There's several scarred gulka, or trees. There's a birthing tree, and there's a signal tree. Australia, as has been said by Monica and others, is a living landscape with a living culture. If I lifted my eyes above the tree line where those trees were located and beyond the back step, I can see Paddy's Ranges State Park. And if you know Central Victoria, just try and picture yourself in that setting. And I love that you asked us to close our eyes earlier, and then the image you brought on the screen. No slides, no power, no point. So hence no slides. Djadjurrung are now the owners and joint managers of Paddy Ranges State Park and 5 other parks through a form of land title in Victoria known as Aboriginal title. How ironic and good. Looking at the woodlands of Paddy's Ranges over the fragmented and largely cleared agricultural landscape in front of me reminds me how critically important the public protected area estate is and must remain as the linchpin of biological diversity and a place where nature conservation is paramount. Our future landscapes must enhance and connect these places. However, Paddy's Ranges is a frankly untidy piece of land, giving expression to what Judge Arung call upside down country. It's country that's been impacted by gold mining, and what an incredible image we had of that. I mean, I too was blown away by that soil profile in the stream. I've never seen anything like that or even imagined it. It's disrupted from recent timber felling and reckless recreational vehicle use, sitting as it does on the backyard of Maryborough. Like many parks, it has inliers of freehold land surrounded by small lifestyle blocks, and it really does demand some love. At Paddy's Ranges and other parks, the characteristic and ecologically important box ironbark woodlands remain and produce various ecosystem services along the way. This country is typical of Southeast Australia. It includes a long history of agriculture, mining, urban and peri-urban development and rural settlement, clearing, habitat fragmentation, changed fire regimes, the introduction of pests, plants and animals. If I drop my gaze on the back step and turn my head, another thing I see is in regional and remote Australia, and away from the headlines of drought or the misquoted paradigm that farmers and those interested in protecting biodiversity are on different pages. The reality is that farmers and graziers are also front and centre in our future landscapes as participants and contributors to the outcomes of a healthy landscape and community. The signs are everywhere. On Cup Day, they were on the farm where I was sitting, with a traditional on-farm income. The pivot irrigator slowly squeaking away across the canola crop, lambs waking us up in the morning next to the kookaburras, shorthorn cattle grazing in a nearby paddock. Off-farm income is derived from the farm stay, and just down the road, a wind farm brings long-term income for another landholder. And nearby again, a paddock's allocated for carbon offsets. No doubt Paul will be talking a little bit about that. And in Maryborough, a bustling Cup Day weekend market. All in all, a vibrant and diverse rural community. Also, on the farm was evidence of not only the pride and protection of the cultural landscape I mentioned earlier, but additionally the enhanced protection of an extensive riparian zone and a selection of areas fenced for retention of old trees. My farmer hosts are prominent land carers. Our future landscapes have to be this mosaic of uses, for as the population grows, as Alex has talked about, the demand for food, fibre and energy grows, the climate changes, the need for protection and management of cultural heritage and biodiversity, and provision of open space for recreation and peaceful reflection remain a constant, critical as all these requirements are for healthy lives and a healthy planet. The Landcare community came together at the National Conference in Brisbane last month, and evident from the participants is the breadth of engagement in Landcare across the country, including from Indigenous Australians from every state and territory. The role of land carers is extensive, and as presentations demonstrated, there is a place for and a thirst from landholders and land carers in considering adaptive responses to climate change, changed agricultural and pastoral practices, to better care for land, soil and water, native species and natural systems, innovative uses of technology, as Alex has mentioned, identifying opportunities for carbon abatement and sequestration, managing cultural heritage, enabling youth, educating the community. All these things are part of land carers and landholders are doing daily. I was speaking with a New South Wales farmer last night who's been around the block a few times and manages country in several parts of Australia. And for several years he chaired one of Australia's largest cattle businesses. He said of Landcare that it is by far and away done more for our regional landscapes than any other combination of activities. I thought, that is a huge statement, but how often does what's immediately in front of your eyes elude you? And what he was talking about was the cultural transformation of agriculture and pastoralism as a consequence of the Landcare movement. There's no doubt there are many farmers and landholders leading the charge in considering their properties as a whole of landscape context, whether it be through regenerative agriculture, other modifications of farming practice that encourage more landscape protection, or the purposeful acquisition of agricultural land with a mixed set of outcomes in mind. I think one of the most important contributions we can make in our future landscapes is to help people see the connection of what they're doing on their own bit of dirt to a broader landscape perspective, whether regional or national. In thinking of future landscapes, it's this last reference to a mixed set of outcomes and broader perspectives I find particularly interesting and potentially able to be multiplied at scale. And I know there are many landholders in the room, and I know particularly Claire Cannon and the work that Claire's doing on Womargama Station, and touching on a few of the things that you mentioned again, Alex, about international fibre suppliers looking directly to where their markets are. I've been especially struck by and admiring of the work of Nigel Sharp and his various endeavours, including particularly Dividend Investment Fund and a recent acquisition in the Serpentine area of central Victoria, along with his work at Mount Rothwell and more recently creating Odendata. The fund is raising tens of millions of dollars to acquire agricultural land and beginning to demonstrate the ability to develop commercial agriculture models that integrate biodiversity as part of the production system and pay a financial return to the investor. I paraphrase this as it's Nigel's stories, not mine, but he's doing it with sheep on the Western Plains grasslands, where his wool is topping the local sales, and a predator-proof fence enables protection of, or will shortly enable protection for grazing bandicoots. And at the Serpentine, with a model which includes agricultural production, replacement of manufactured fertilisers with waste from Melbourne, predator-proof fencing again, and waterways management. The novelty of this is the innovation, the scale, and that the investors are set to win a financial return on their investment. I mentioned Nigel set up Odendata, and in 2018, it was the recipient of part of a funding that the National Australia Bank provided for entrepreneurial, enterprising and innovative businesses. A brief part of this address now is about the value that can be contributed by such investments. The grant from the National Australia Bank will support Odendata's core operations, enabling them to scale their environmental and social impacts and demonstrate the benefit of doing business with biodiversity. In a symposium last week in Melbourne on conservation finance, we looked at expanding opportunities to support just this type of enterprise. Conservation finance is the practice of raising and managing funding to support land, water, natural and cultural capital, resource conservation, I beg your pardon. The practice of blending finance for mutually beneficial outcomes. What we must do is make the most of government, private and philanthropic investments to meet, in this case, the community good of the conservation outcomes. Nigel is demonstrating that capability through his ventures, and the possibility is limited only by the imagination of the ideas and the availability of financing. And the strongly held view of financiers and prospective social impact investors is that the resource, the finance, is waiting there to invest. And I'll be interested, you're nodding your head, Alex. If the investment by the National Australia Bank is one example, another is that of the role of the BHP Billiton Foundation in supporting the 10 Deserts region project in Central Australia, and I won't go into the detail of that. I want to come back to a fortnight ago where the Taungurung, I mentioned one of the Kulin Nation clans, signed their settlement agreement with the state following Gunai in the east and Djadjurrung in central Victoria. Not far behind are further traditional owner groups doing the same thing. Joint management plans for parks, already commonplace through much of the rest of Australia, are now rolling down the songlines in Victoria. This and the re-emergence of Aboriginal enterprises throughout the country is our future landscape. For Djadjurrung, their settlement agreement means there's an effective Clans Aboriginal Corporation as a governance body, a dedicated Djadjurrung Parks Ranger Force operating through the region, and the Jandak business enterprise building Djadjurrung employment and capability. Already widespread in remoter parts of Australia is a new thirst in Victoria for utilising traditional fire practices to improve biodiversity outcomes, manage excessive fuel loads and return traditional knowledge to country. Institutions as traditionally conservative as the Victorian Country Fire Authority have been working with traditional owners and environmental NGOs for several years now. I heard a great story recently where the CFA turned up to do a burn on some private land with traditional owners, and after the burn had gone ahead to plan and they were blacking out, one of the CFA, or several of the CFA crew wandered over to the traditional owners and said, "We're going home now, you guys have got this covered." As a member of the CFA, I find that very hard to believe. But it demonstrates the extent to which there is belief in, support of and encouragement for traditional owners. Nothing is surer in thinking of future landscapes than the growing presence and role of traditional owners in the management of country and in the use of fire, and the increased opportunities this will bring for improving and sharing ecological and cultural knowledge, including intergenerationally, and for providing economic benefit. Nothing is more necessary that this be a mutual, collaborative, cooperative and respectful partnership. The final point I'll make in thinking about future landscapes is to underscore the importance of those collaborations and alliances which I've highlighted in my remarks. There are many, perhaps most of you, involved in collaborations of one sort or another in this room. One collaboration I think is particularly important nationally is the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. 12 months ago, a decision was made to broaden ALCA, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance's membership, and now Bush Heritage, Greening Australia, Landcare Australia, NRM Regions Australia and the South Endeavour Trust have joined the previous members, being the 5 state governing bodies, think Trust for Nature Victoria, and the Nature Conservancy to broaden the base and profile of ALCA. This is important because it provides a voice and a forum for the very matters at the heart of this symposium. Successful conferences have now been held each of the last 4 years, attended by, at the last conference in Brisbane, about 300 people from NGOs, NRMs, philanthropy and government, all keen to discuss matters of practical and strategic significance. The individual members of this alliance, each themselves, have tremendous influence, if you know even one of them. Landcare alone is served by more than 5,000 separate landcare groups and networks working in rural and urban communities as volunteers, building and consolidating community, social and environmental resilience and contributing to landscape health. Collectively, the members of the Alliance and ALCA as an institution will contribute enormously to our future landscapes. ALCA is building its reputation and profile, and earlier this year was also a beneficiary of the NAB funding. I mention it again because investments into the sort of thing we're doing are coming from many, many different quarters. The Australian Land Conservation Alliance will be releasing a membership model in 2019, along with a strategic plan that goes to the policy levers and themes that need to be addressed nationally to ensure the health of our landscapes. The ALCA conference in Brisbane last month was entitled Accelerating Connection, exploring connections across people and landscapes and referencing the importance of connectivity. Think people, think places for Australian landscapes. So I started this address referencing connectivity in the landscape at Maryborough and have spoken of collaboration and shared outcomes. These are, in my view, the hallmarks of our future landscapes. This is not a new phenomenon and is underpinned, it underpinned the decade of landcare, ushered in under Bob Hawke when Philip Toyne and Rick Farley united the Australian Conservation Foundation and National Farmers Federation to bring that proposal to the Australian Government. But the future collaboration will be wider than that, accounting especially for traditional owners, but also providing opportunity for those in finance and philanthropy to play their role through benevolence or for financial return on investment, or various outcomes in between, alongside the hand of government. As a society, we will benefit, and so will our future landscapes. So, from the backstep, I feel optimistic that as the journey is proceeding, the options at our disposal for protecting our future landscapes are opening up. And I look forward to continuing that journey with many of you. Thanks.